So today we'll be discussing ransomware mitigations. We have Ian Moore with us. Ian Moore is with CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of Department of Homeland Security. But Ian is the analyst assigned to Washington State. So he's local and he knows us. So with that, take it away.
All right, give me just a second. Make sure that's the right screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Ian Moore. I am, just like Dave said, I work for CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as a part of the Department of Homeland Security. And as the Cybersecurity State Coordinator, my responsibilities are for the state, local, tribal, and territorial governments within the state of Washington. I was born here, raised here. I went in the Navy, went in the Air Force, and then came back. And today, we're going to talk about ransomware. All right, let's get this rolling. And so we're going to talk about actually what is ransomware, stuff maybe you've heard in the news or stuff that we can pull out from intel. And we're going to talk about some demographics as it relates to who it affects and the types of information they're looking for. We're going to talk about who's targeting you specifically in your organizations, not just nation states, but hackers also. We're going to talk about some of the threats, ransomware threats in the wild, and that's going to hopefully surprise some of you. We're also going to talk about some mitigation, stuff you can do now, stuff that your IT shop is probably doing already, but it just gives you some more insights. We're going to talk a little bit about the CISA services that we can provide, both me personally, going out to your organization and sitting down across a conference room with you, but also our headquarters services that we have back in DC. And then we'll talk about some third-party services, organization called Pisces, and then the IACC, as most of you already know. What I'm not here to do is I'm not here to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt. What I'm here to do is to increase your awareness to help you make better decisions. So what is ransomware? It's malware that encrypts your data that an attacker can use for extortion or to demand a ransom. Fortunately, we get phishing emails by the hundreds, and that's the primary method that most attackers use to get into your environment. But there's also drive-by hack sites. So if you happen to go to a site through some sort of Google search or whatever, that maybe already has malware in it, there's a chance you could get malware from that basically leads to a ransomware attack on your site. So most of the time they get in by remote access through unmonitored internet access. So if your organization or your home PC, you're not actually blocking or monitoring your internet, then malware could be coming into your organization. Most attackers claim to use military encryption, and what that really means is that they use the same encryption methods that the military does use. And they do that for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's because they don't want to be challenged. Other times they just want to seem more legitimate. So once the malware is in, they can control it manually. So if a script gets into your organization, it'll set an alert to the attacker, and the attacker could actually log in through the web shell or the backdoor that the malware is created, and actually, command by command get into your network. But there's also remote control, so there could be scripts that allow them to do the traversing of your network. So attackers rely that you don't have backups, that you don't have redundancy built in. They want you to have to pay the ransom. They want you to have to use your insurance or somehow get that money out of you. But like I said, they're relying that you don't have a backup program. Also, you can't trust hackers. just, there's no honor among thieves. There's no guarantee that they're going to give you the decryption key once that you've paid them. There's a thing, well, there's single, double, and triple extortion. I don't know if you've heard about those, but the first one is the standard extortion, where they say, we're going to encrypt your data unless you pay the ransom. But because there's more organizations that are like, okay, we're not going to pay the ransom. So they've gone to double extortion. And through that's the releasing of your financial data into the dark web. So that's the double. And then the third, because organizations are still choosing to not pay the ransom, they're like, okay, we're going to contact your customers and we're going to threaten to release their data unless they pay the extortion. So those three levels of extortion are the ones that are that most attackers are using now. And you're hearing it more in the news that everybody seems to do this single extortion. Some of them are actually threatening the double and triple more often now, and we're hearing more stories about that. So who's targeting you? We've all seen pictures like this, and we think of it's some hacker in their mom's basement wearing a hoodie, and it's all dark, and they're like, eating Pop-Tarts and Red Bull, but it's not always like that. So some other organizations could be Iran. This group is they're wanted by the FBI because they've been caught, not really caught, but they've been identified, but also Russian hackers and also Chinese hackers. So these are the nation states that are working to get your information and to get your money. But also you have all of these organizations. So you have terrorists, and they're looking to fund their operations so that they can do whatever it is they want to do, and they need money to do that, whether it's to buy weapons and materials or to be able to travel and execute their plans. But also human trafficking rings. They want money so that they can support their operations. Crime as a service is another one, because they're selling ransomware. They basically have businesses where they develop software. It just so happens the software is ransomware, and they are selling it to organizations on the dark web to do ransomware. So when you pay the ransom, it's actually going back into an organization that could be funded by the ransom to continue to produce ransomware. And then there's hacktivisms and hacktivists that basically have some sort of other motivation that are hacking because of some sort of ideology, and they're being funded through ransomware. And so these are the organizations that are targeting you within your sector. So some of the demographics. This was polled a few weeks back, actually a few months back, and it was just a snapshot in time that the report that we received is that these are the industries, these are the geographies, and this is the type of information that during the week that the ransomware organizations were targeting. As you can see in the left-hand column, it's virtually every sort of industry that we use every day to do various things in our life. And that just indicates that they're no kidding targeting everything that we value. And then the geography, you can see that ransomware is targeting virtually every major country in the world. And it's not, it doesn't really, well, you can tell that there's some that aren't on there, but this was just a snapshot. There are still ransomwares that target other countries that even not on this list. And then information. So whatever your organization collects, whatever type of data it is, whether it's operational data, whether it's business data, whether it's customer data, they want that information because you value that for your organization and you'll pay to get it back. So let's talk about some ransomware in the wild. So this is, once again, this is a snapshot a few months back, but you'll notice that the organizations within this, in parentheses, you'll see the country code. And like the previous slide, this shows that there's ransomware that are targeting virtually every country in the world. And nobody, I mean, there's stuff in China, there's stuff in Russia, there's stuff in Taiwan. It's not a, it's just very all over the place, and it's really hard to understand why or where, but they're running scripts to do this, and they're trying to make money. It's a business for them. And you can notice the Ragnarok ransomware, they released their decryption key a while back, and they closed up their shop. I don't remember exactly why they did that, but maybe the cost to do this business was too high. Maybe they realized that it wasn't what they saw themselves doing. I don't know. But they released their key, and it kind of, I guess, for those people that were hit by that ransomware, that was a good thing. So let's talk about some of those things that you can do now. Like I said previously, that your IT shop is probably already working on a lot of this, but this is just to refresh in your mind, to help a little more understanding of what these things are. The first one is network segmentation. This is the idea that you break up your network into pieces using VLANs or using routers or using firewalls, or switches to allow pieces and parts of your network to stay separate from each other. It forces you to understand the communication between the two, between the zones, the network, but also it allows you to understand the communication between them and what's authorized and what's not. Multi-factor authentication. If there was one thing that I would want you to get out of this, is multi-factor authentication. Single-factor authentication is actually a bad practice. It's lacking in its security. Multi-factor is what you see when you log into your social media site. When it kind of kicks you off and makes you log in again, it wants you to do a multi-factor authentication, meaning either it sends a message to your cell phone or it sends you an email with a code, and it basically validates who you are so that it can trust that you have the access that you need. But especially every remote access should have some sort of multi-factor authentication. The next one is strong spam filters to prevent phishing emails from reaching end users. This is huge because if your spam filters aren't set properly, then you're letting emails get to your end users. And those are the ones that are going to be clicking on the phishing links or double clicking on the attachments to see, does the CEO really want to send me a gift card? Probably not. But if your filters prevent that from happening, then your users will never get those phishing emails. The next one is user training. Of course, we talk about it and we beat that drum all the time, that user training. Expose your users to what a phishing email looks like. The good ones, the bad ones, the little tips and tricks that you can use to look and mouse over URLs to see where it actually goes, and to actually look into the email addresses to see where it came from. But the user training is huge. So filtering network traffic, this is all about making sure that packets aren't getting into your environment that shouldn't be getting in there. And if you're not filtering your network traffic, then you are letting packets that could be malicious into your environment. So making sure you set your firewalls and your network management in a way that filters out traffic that's known bad. So the next one's all about updating software. Update your software, having a program established in your environment, in your organization that manages the software on your computers. If you have desktops that are connected to the network, you should have some sort of program that allows that controls which software is allowed and which software is not allowed. And you should have a system set up so that if somebody wants software, they're only allowed to download approved software, or they have to ask for permission. The next one is limited access to resources over the network, restricting RDP and blocking SMB. So RDP is remote desktop protocol. It's a way that administrators can use to go into other computers to troubleshoot and things like that. Well, you need to restrict that and only allow administrators that specifically have a business purpose to be able to use RDP. And then blocking SMB. SMB is about file sharing. If you don't use file sharing within your environment, then block SMB, or at least monitor for it or its use, because those two protocols are big when it comes to attackers, and they use those all the time. So setting antivirus and anti-malware programs to conduct regular scans. Your organization's probably spending money on these tools, so you need to make sure that they're doing regular scans, not just there and scanning when you want to scan. So occasionally you scan your desktop, but they should be conducting regular scans. And that's really a baseline control that should be enabled anyways. The next one's basically a risk-based and prioritized asset inventory. This means you need to make sure you know all of the assets that are in your environment, and you need to understand them based on the risks they're accepting. So if you have a server that has a Linux-based OS, well, you have to understand the risks associated with that OS and the vulnerabilities associated with it. But then with this asset inventory, you need to understand the priority. So which ones are more critical than others? You need to understand the differences between a web server and a file server, or your domain controllers compared to other servers or other desktops. And the prioritization is going to help you understand when it comes time to update and spending money on those assets. So the next one is preventing unauthorized execution. So anytime, especially Office products, anytime they're coming into your environment, you should be disabling the macros on them. You shouldn't allow them in. But that is different than somebody creating a product within your environment that has macros in it. So this is just, products coming in from the outside should be blocked. Also implementing application allow listing. This is basically an application whitelist that only allows specific applications to run. So you know which applications are allowed and you know which ones are not. And by not allowing the other ones to execute, you're blocking a threat vector. So monitoring blocking inbound connections, that should be a no-brainer. You should not be allowing, unless it's a legitimate business requirement, inbound connections. It's different now that we're, a lot of people are remote, but you should still be at least monitoring that. And then Cobalt Strike servers are a pen testing server that attackers use a lot. And there are signatures based on these Cobalt Strike servers that you can block for. So your IT and your network managers, they should understand the difference, and they should be able to block those explicitly. So in the last one on this slide is to establish and test a robust backup program. The biggest issue here is that in order to have a robust program, you have to do frequent backups. So that means like a weekly full backup and daily incremental backups. But then you also need some sort of strategy. We recommend the 3-2-1 strategy, 3 copies of backups, 2 different medias on site. So maybe one in the cloud, one in the file server, and maybe one on an external hard drive, and then 1 copy offsite, and that one maybe is in the cloud. But there's a total, there's probably 10 different ways to execute a strategy like this. And there are other strategies too, but this is the easiest one to explain. And then what makes this a robust program is by testing and recovering from backups on a set schedule. So if you do it once a year, that's better than nothing. We recommend that you do it quarterly, and you know that the backups you're taking will actually work when you need them to work. So now this is focused on critical infrastructure, but CISA and the FBI, they urge owners and operators to apply the following mitigations for critical infrastructure owners. Make sure you implement network segmentation between the IT and the OT networks. So this includes, the SCADA and ICS that we've heard about, and the SCADA systems are basically the supervisory control and data acquisition systems that pull data from the sensors, from the PLCs, from the valves, from whatever it is that's on the OT network. And then the IT, which is normal, the business systems, and separating those two, making sure that you have a firewall, you have controls in place to know when information is flowing in between those two. And sometimes there's a business need for that communication, because you want to update, maybe you want to update the OT network, and you need to do that from the IT network because that's where your file shares are. There's value in that, but you need to make sure that you've got that network segmentation so that you know it's controlled. They also recommend to define a DMZ. So this is focused mostly on those systems that need internet access. So sometimes a vendor will come in, and it's already a vendor you have a partnership with, and you've already paid for it, but it needs access to the internet because that's where it gets its updates. Well, create a DMZ for that. Apply the controls necessary to protect it, knowing that it's going to be needing to go out to the internet. Don't allow connections in, only allow connections that initiate from inside that go out. And there's a whole bunch of security controls you can apply to a DMZ to protect those devices that are in the DMZ. Next is actually applying logical zones for OT assets. So the difference between OT and IT are very similar as far as the zones, because we break up different VLANs in our IT network just like we would in our OT network, because we don't need the finance department to be talking with the security operations center as far as their broadcast alerts that go over the line. So the same thing in the OT network. You need to break it up. As an example, I worked in the shipyard here in Bremerton, and we had lathes, and then we had 3D printers, and they were in an environment where they could, until we made changes, they were able to talk to each other, even though you didn't really need to, but you could detect that their broadcasts were going over the whole side of the OT network. And so once we broke that up into logical zones, the lathes could communicate with the other lathes and the computers that managed the lathes. And then the 3D printers had their own zone, and they communicated with their computers that managed those tools. So once you've created the zones, you want to define acceptable communications between the zones. So this is more of a policy control where the organization, the leadership management have to kind of agree that these zones should be able to communicate with these zones and being able to work that out. And then document that, because the next one is to actually deploy security controls to filter network traffic and monitor those communications between the zones. So the first one was setting up the policy, defining it, documenting it. And the next one is actually executing those controls to do the work it takes to protect those zones. Once you've done that, you become aware of how things are communicated, and sometimes you discover things that communications that shouldn't be broadcast. It allows you to become more efficient in your management of the OT environment. So the next one is prohibiting ICS protocols from traversing the IT network and the internet. So like we said a bit before, once you set up the network segmentation between the two, prohibit, put the controls in place unless it's an absolute business necessity, don't let your industrial control protocols go over the IT network. You shouldn't be allowing communication into your IT environment, and especially over the internet. There's a tool called Shodan that allows you to see everything that's communicating on the internet, in based on protocol, based on tools, based on an organization. And there's IoT devices, and there's industrial control systems, there's SCADA systems that connect over the internet. And you step back and you have to really wonder, did anybody even ask the question if this is okay? Chances are they don't even know it's happening, because they don't have those controls, all of those controls in place.
So Ian, I'm wondering if you can take that like down one level of technology notch.
Okay.
Because for the most part, we manage water systems, right? We're kind of administrators, or we're operators. We run the pumps, we do maintenance, and we interact with the SCADA system, but there's usually, until we get to larger utilities, there's not an IT department to handle this. So I can see it's like we write a policy, don't click on suspicious links. We train our employees, that could happen. But if if we write a policy that, data networks won't communicate outside their zones, like, okay, that's right. But how do the computers don't listen to me when I talk to them? You actually have to, I guess, install something.
So, what we know, you have OT managers, OT engineers, the people that are actually doing the work in the OT environment. They understand how their systems work. They understand how they need to communicate. What it comes down to is being able to apply the security controls necessary to protect that data. Being able to step back and say, okay, is the only way to interact with that through the IT network, or do I need a separate line that goes, a separate computer on my desk that connects directly to that? I don't always have to go through the IT network to get there. In fact, you shouldn't, because that opens up vulnerabilities. Because if you get ransomware on that desktop that's in the IT network, but you have a direct connection to the OT network, then you might as well just open up the ransomware to the OT network also. I think what you're asking is that there's a handful of controls that the OT manager, OT engineer needs to be able to apply to their environment. That maybe that takes another level of knowledge, like an OT cybersecurity training for that group of people, because they understand their environment, but they may not understand the cybersecurity related to it. And because now it's not as like it's coming to light, but over the past, I think I've been working about 10 years in this environment. Only until recently are people actually asking the question, hey, should I have my IT and my OT network connected? Well, no, it needs to be either a physical separation, or you need to have some sort of jump box, or you need to have a device that's locked down that only allows, specific users, admins, or engineers that have specific permission to be able to go in and out and to move data inside and out of that environment.
So Ian, related to that, and you've kind of started to address it. So for a SCADA system and the whole network segmentation, what are there specific things that like a water or wastewater operator should not do to access their SCADA system? Like should they not be accessing it via their personal cell phone, or should they not have the clerk treasurer in town hall be accessing it? Can you talk about the specific things maybe they should avoid doing?
Yes. Okay. So, and the challenge is that these organizations tend to be smaller. they tend to not be a massive organization that has all the resources available. And if something goes wrong, they need to be able to fix it. Otherwise, people are losing, that are not able to access that resource. So sometimes there are business requirements that they can access the SCADA system from their phone or from their laptop using a hotspot, or from their house. But the key is how they're doing that. If they're just connecting directly because they have a modem on their water SCADA system, probably not a good idea. But if that's the only way to do it, then at least try to lock down the communication to that modem that only allows certain IPs or maybe certain MACs, meaning the address of the computer itself, to be able to access that. There's controls that you can put in place that even though you're going to use your phone to be able to communicate with the SCADA so that you can change a setting or whatever to prevent meltdown, I don't know. But there's ways to communicate that you can put controls in place to protect that communication so that not anybody can run malware and actually get into that environment. So in a perfect world, if you're talking in an organization, the OT engineer would have a special desk or a special computer that is directly connected to that. They're not using their IT computer to do that. Like I said, unless they had a jump box that was locked down and had controls applied to it. That's a perfect world. Not everybody can live that way because resources and desk space and just the complexity of setting up a second network that reaches out to the users in the offices can be a challenge.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so these smaller utilities, yeah, they do have some vendor that's providing the SCADA system. And so what they probably, it sounds like they need to do is reach out to that provider, whether it was some engineer that programmed it, or if it's like WonderWorks or whatever your, commercial, for the most part, it's their commercial SCADA systems. But is there anything that the local utility can either look for or to know that the SCADA software they're getting is doing these things? Because I can imagine feeling very much at the mercy that this salesperson is like, oh yes, our system is totally cyber attack proof and it's got all these protections in it, but you don't, I don't know how to know.
Yeah. And that's unfortunately a very common question, because they do whatever, you do your business very well. The OT engineer does his business very well. The vendor comes in and they do their business very well, and selling their products is their business. The problem is they may not have a security department that has helped them as they develop these tools to lock it down, to secure it. And unfortunately, the utilities are at the mercy of those vendors. All I could really say is that CISA is here to support that effort. If you've already bought something, we can help assess it to determine how vulnerable it is and whether it's full of holes or whether it's locked down. If it's ahead of time, there are resources that we can use to help vet or kind of analyze certain vendors and certain tools to determine whether they're as secure as they should be before you apply or before you buy them. But like I said, we have a ton of, whether it's services or assessments that we can do to help utilities understand more about how much risk they're accepting in their environments. And we'll talk about that in actually it's the next slide. So, yeah.
thanks for taking this detour with these more in-depth questions, and
Yeah, no
please
problem.
proceed.
Okay, so I'm sure most of you have seen the water and wastewater sector report that CISA and FBI and EPA and NSA have sent out recently. If you haven't, find it, read it, understand it, because there's a lot of good tidbits in it that you could help apply to your environment. So let's talk about our assessments and services. So what we do is I personally will go out to your organization and do assessments. And the top 3 are the ones that I do personally. The CRR takes about 6 to 8 hours. It's a cyber resilience review. And what it does, it shows you your maturity levels for the programs and policies and controls you have in place currently. It covers 10 domains, the 10 typical domains of cybersecurity, 299 questions. It's a long one. We call it our granddaddy assessment, but it gives you a nice report, color coded, so you understand where you sit related to the controls and the tasks associated with each domain. The external dependencies management is a smaller one, 4 hours. Typically we kind of throw this one in addition to a CRR because this came out of a demand to understand supply chain and relationships and vendor relationships and resilience associated with those. And so what we do is we ask a bunch of questions about if this vendor, this external entity is, if they went out of business for whatever reason, which is common right now, unfortunately, how would that affect your mission, your critical mission? Say you buy a valve and only one company provides that valve and they go out of business. What does that mean? And the EDM forces you to think about those questions because it's about resilience. It's about being able to bounce back after some sort of bad thing happens. So that's the EDM. The next one is the CIS. This one, it's a short one, 80 plus controls, covers 5 domains, and it's a CRR light. This one can actually be a self-administered, so I could send you the files and you could go through the checklist yourself and then get it back to us and we would assess it and we would talk about it and probably have a couple meetings and then talk about the things you can correct to make it better, make your environment better. We call it the CRR light because it kind of covers the big points of the CRR. So the next one is the evaluation tool. This is a tool that you can apply to any endpoint that you have in your environment. And it checks for indications of compromise. It checks your registry settings. It checks a whole bunch of different things. And then recently, they've applied the ransomware readiness assessment module to it so that it checks those things that are typically indicators of compromise for ransomware. And you can apply this to any system in your environment, and it gives you a nice report. So that is actually the first one that we get from headquarters. So the bottom 5 here, we get from our headquarters. So you would request through me probably, or going to their website to request the CSET tool, the cybersecurity evaluation tool. And they'll send you a link or they'll send it to you to download it. The next one is the phishing campaign assessment. A lot of you have heard that we do phishing campaign assessments, and it's a 6-week program that it basically fishes your organization and determines the susceptibility to phishing in your environment. And at the end of the 6 weeks, they give you a nice report and kind of let you know what you need to shore up. So the next one is, we call it the vulnerability scanning, or CyHi, the cybersecurity hygiene. And it's weekly scans of your environment, the external network presence of your environment that you want to know. It's designed for organizations that maybe don't have their own vulnerability scanning capability. Or if you do, you just want a second or maybe a third eye on to see how you're doing. And so we set you up, and honestly, this will run every week until you tell them to stop. And so there's organizations, I mean, hundreds of organizations that get vulnerability scanning right now, and they get their weekly report. Now, also, if you have a high, like a vulnerability that's a high, it'll scan it every 4 days rather than every 7 days. Now, until you get it fixed. If you have a critical, it'll scan it every 2 days, I believe, or maybe every other day, and it'll give you that information until it's gone. And so it's very, very handy. So the next one, the Vader, we call it. It's probably created from a geeky cybersecurity person, because it's sort of Star Wars-esque, but it's a design review where they'll actually look at your configuration to determine, do you have the right configuration settings on your servers and your network gear and things like that. It'll also look at your logs to determine whether you are collecting the right data and the right amount, and are you getting the alerts that you need based on the tools you have. And then network traffic analysis is also about being able to understand what your traffic flow is and how much you're letting in versus blocking. And then the next one is the RVA. And so I'm not going to read it to you, but it's basically the most technical assessment we do. It used to be, I think they did a week in person and then a week away. And these are hard to come by because they're highly sought after, because they're very technical and very good, and it covers a lot of different things. But I'm not allowed to oversell this, even though I know there's probably a ton of people in the audience that would love an RVA, but we only get 2 of them per region per year. So in our region of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska, we only get 2 of these that we can schedule. So, and I think they're unfortunately already assigned. Anyways, the RVA is another one that the headquarters can do, and very valuable.
So Ian,
yeah.
So most of this slide is about evaluating an existing network and looking for deficiencies that you can go fix.
Yes.
So based on the theory that it's easier to set it up right in the first place rather than to go back and fix it later, imagine I'm a wastewater design engineer and I'm going to build a new plant, and I know wastewater. I know I need these valves to turn on, I need these blowers to come on, I need air here, I need mixing here. And I'm relying on a SCADA system to run this new plant. What is a best practice, or how could we engage with your agency to look at this new SCADA system from time equals 0 to make sure it's got those zones set up and the external communication is limited in the right way?
Well, so that is a tough one, because we don't. In my previous life, I used to be a consultant where I would actually go in and help project managers think about the cybersecurity controls they need to put in place. And as you can see, none of these really do that, but we can still support those projects as far as being able to apply best practices and give ideas on what those best practices are before the organization sets it up. That would just be setting up meetings and talking through that. Now, I can't guarantee the timelines. I can't guarantee the products that would come out of those meetings, but we can still, it's a part of our titles as advisors. We can give observations for observation for considerations. And those can turn into those activities that need to be taken ahead of time. Just like when if you're writing software, you need to make sure that you put security and controls in place ahead of time so that you're not worried about it at the end and trying to apply security at the end when you're getting ready to go live. The cost is so much cheaper if you do it up ahead of time versus applying at the end when things are breaking or hackers are getting into your stuff. So I think to answer your question, by making contact with us and talking with us about the projects you're planning, there's definitely best practices we can provide and we can advise on before the organization sets up these things. And then once they've done those, we can then come in and do assessments on them. So that's probably the best answer I could give you on that right now.
Okay, so if I were a water system that's facing some sort of big upgrade that's going to install a SCADA system, scheduling some sort of, even just a quick meeting with our design engineer, the SCADA provider, and somebody in your office, just to go through, here's the things you want to worry about, here's the things we're concerned about, would be a good, like, maybe just the first toe in the water, but that'd be a good place to start.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we actually have SCADA experts within CISA that do that exact thing. It's just not here in the region. We would be more general based on best practices on IT and OT. But we have like Idaho National Labs. Those guys are amazing when it comes to their knowledge of this stuff. We would probably bring those guys in also. And I'm sure many of you guys know those guys already because they do this stuff all over the nation. But yeah, so we would definitely bring people in because this is a gap in kind of in the OT environment right now. There's a huge demand for it and not a lot of resource.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. And I apologize for sidetracking again.
Yeah, no sweat, no sweat. So those are our assessments. I do the top 3 and then headquarters does the bottom 5. All you have to do is send me an email or call me asking for those. And right now we're open and available to travel all over the state. And we actually have people in Oregon and Idaho and Alaska if you're listening from there. So I want to talk about Pisces. So Pisces is designed for smaller, whether it's small cities or counties, but small local governments, because what it does is it allows students to be able to get hands-on experience and be able to monitor these small organizations and actually report as if they were a SOC for that city or county. Security Operations Center, for those that didn't know. It partners with a handful of universities, and the idea is that it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The students get experience and the organization gets the protection. They get the real-time monitoring. So that's Pisces. And you can see the link down at the bottom. And then also the ISACs. Of course, everybody knows the ISACs. If you don't, please go to cisecurity.org and read about it. There's free services, there's information sharing capabilities, and there's alerts that come out. We partner with them for our alerting because we know they have great resources and they have connections to organizations that we're still establishing. And because of those relationships, our partnership is very synergistic. So that's that. And let's see. Okay, and that's the bulk of my brief. So we talked about ransomware. We defined it. We talked about how it affects virtually every industry, every geographic area around the world, and targeting any sort of information that you have that you're working on. We talked about who's targeting you, how it's nation states, and a lot of other organizations that want your money and want your data. We talked about the threats in the wild, the different types of ransomware that's out there, and how it really is targeting, not indiscriminate of an organization. It's just targeting everybody. But then I also dug into the many mitigations that you can apply now, or that your IT shop can apply now. Multi-factor authentication. Our director, Jen Easterly, had said that if you apply MFA to your environment, to your remote access, it'll block 90% of ransomware that tries to get in your environment. She quoted, that's a quote from her. But I also talked about CISA services, talked about the stuff that I can do, stuff that headquarters can do. And then we talked about Pisces and the ISACs. And that covers it. So here is my information. And then my counterpart, Ron Waters, is the CSA for the region. That's his information too. We are here for you guys. We are not here for ourselves. I am here for the state of Washington. I love Washington. I'm here to protect you guys. We are here to protect you from ransomware and all the other threats that are out there as best we can. We have resources. Please use us. Any questions? Any additional questions? Because I know you've asked some already.
Yeah, feel free to enter it into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you.
Okay.
Well, Ian, I guess that reflects that you did a very thorough presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Had a lot of fun.
I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes while I put in the game code.
Thank you for reminding us about the important stuff.
All right. All right, then. I will